Hello everyone, welcome to JS Gigs and my name is Deepak. Here in this tutorial, we are going to be talking about some of the exciting stuff that comes with Angular 18. So in this tutorial, as we had already spoken about in the introduction video, that I'm going to be covering all the new latest and greatest aspect of Angular 18 and what they advertise as the new features of Angular, so to say, right? So we had earlier listed down the list of things that we are going to be talking about. So let's just open those list once again. So here, if you notice, all right. So the first thing we're going to be talking about in this chapter is zoneless change detection. So if you put the zoneless change detection, Angular says that it is going to be resulting in lower bundle size, faster load, readable state trace, simpler debugging, and improved composability for micro frontend and interoperability with other frameworks, right? So these are the 4-5 aspects that Angular talks about if you use a zoneless change, right? So earlier, as I had spoken, that firstly, earlier as I had shown you that I already have an Angular 17 application, which is running right here. And if you log in into this application, it takes you to the dashboard, which is the landing page, and here you can do a lot of search. You can look at all of these records, and there are other 3 tabs available as well. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to be first of all changing this application from Angular 17 to Angular 18. And once you change this application from Angular 17 to 18, and that's when we would start putting in the Zone.js changes, and we'll start noticing all these, and then we will cross-validate if all these things are really true about zoneless change detection or not, right? So let's just dive right into the documentation of zoneless Angular. So here, if you notice that I've opened the official documentation of Angular 18, and here if you look at under the Angular, it states V18, right? So that's let me just go back, right? So here you can notice that it is talking about the Angular 18, right? So now Angular without Zone.js, right? The zoneless. So this is the chapter that we are going to be covering, and all the aspect on this particular documentation is that we are going to be covering in detail, right? So here is the application, here is the documentation, and then before that, I also need to open a documentation wherein I'm going to be talking about what really needs to be changed from Angular 17 to 18. So in order to do that, I'll have to search Angular date. There you go. So here you notice that, from the basic 17 to 18, this is what we will have to do, right? So it's going to be a basic app and show me the update, right? So here is the guide, first of all, to change the application from 17 to 18, which is what we are going to be covering first. And then we are going to be making the application zoneless, and that's when we will cross-validate all these 5 aspects that are listed here, and with something that Angular also advertises in their documentation or in their release notes, right? So let's get rolling by upgrading the application from 17 to 18. Right. So now I'll take you, so let's see that what it has to say, right? So before you update, it says that you don't need to do anything before moving between these versions. Update to the newer version, review these changes and perform the action, update your application. Make sure you're using supported version of Node.js before you upgrade Angular 18 to support Node.js version 18 or newer in the application project directory. So let's just see that the first step is true or not. So let me take you to the code editor, and here is the code editor. Let me open another terminal over here. So let's just see if the correct node version is what I'm using or not. There you go. So I'm using Angular 28.0, so which is what it requires. So let me check this up. Right. So first step done. Now the next step, it says that it in the application project directory run ng update Angular 4.18 and Angular into update your application to Angular 18. So let's see if it is right, and let's see if we face any error by running these 2 commands, right? So now again, let me take you back to the code editor, and here at the code editor, I'm going to be running these 2 commands, right? Before that, I'll also close the application which is running on a different port, and also let me kill the port as well manually. And there you go, the first error, right? It says, let's just see that the error that we have received. Migration failed, incompatible peer dependencies found. Peer dependencies found, installation dependency means it might not work correctly together. Your dependency warning when installation dependency means those dependencies might not work together. Peer, you can use -F force option to ignore the compatibility peer dependencies and instead address the warning later. See private folder, this for further details, right? So it's basically talking about the Angular schematic ESLint requires, okay, so Angular ESLint schematic. So let me just open the package JSON. ESLint. Let's see. Oh yeah, there you go. Fine. So what I would do is I'll update these versions as well. So how do I figure out the right version? Again, let me take you back to the browser. And there at the browser, I'm going to be basically taking you to the documentation. So let's just see npm. Just click on it. So let's see which version of ESLint builder is compatible Angular 18. So what I would do is like I'll try to open the version where I had received the error. So I'll just copy it from my code editor and put it right here. Builder. It looks like 18.01 is the major release, as can be seen here, which is obviously the latest, and we are using the Angular latest. So let me change this version and in my code editor. So here in my code editor, ESLint builder, let me change it to 18.01. Save it. Let me see if the plugin is also right or not. Plugin and plugin template and ESLint template parser, TypeScript template, ESLint, and all that stuff, right? So see if this thing. Okay, commit this change, and then let's just run this again. Now it's the ESLint schematic where it has a problem. Okay, so let me just copy this ESLint schematic and go back to the npm documentation in the browser, and here I'll just try to see what is the latest version it has. I can try to change this as well. Okay, so it looks like there are some problem. So ESLint schematics is again something which is not really very important. It is basically for the linting purpose. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be installing this with --, probably force command. Okay, so this way you can actually change it, but then there is another way to basically there's a way to overcome this particular error, and which is by providing the force command. So I'm going to be running it with the force command, and let's see if that works correctly or not. All right, as you can see that it has rightly updated all my packages, and let's see if they're working correctly or not. Let's just wait for a moment until this gets installed, and then we will see that if it is really right or not, and we'll also try to verify what were the things that changed in this update. All right, so when you're migrating it to 18, this is the option that it presents currently. Select the migrations that you would like to run. Space to select, A to toggle, I to invert selection. Okay, so all right, so what I'm going to do is like I'm just going to be selecting it. All right, so now you can see that the application has been updated to Angular 18, and let's just see things that it has changed, or at least look at the log files, look at the logs that it has generated, right? So migrate application project to the newer build system. Application project that are using package browser or browser ES will be migrated to the newer application builder. You can read more about this. Okay, that's fine. Now execution update to web binding that we have invalid expression to use long form responsive migrate completion, no changes made. Replace deprecated HTTP related module with provider function. So that's something that it has also changed, and something that we are going to be validating now. Now let me again take you back. Before I go to the browser, let me just show you things that has changed, right? So here, if you look at the package JSON, that if you are migrating from the older version to the newer version, these are the things that it has getting changed. So Angular animation, common compiler, core forms, platform browser, dynamic, and so on and so forth. And further you come down in the dev dependencies, also a lot of things have changed, right? So all these versions have changed from Angular 17 to 18. Now look at the package log file again. That's something that you probably would be aware already, that it changes the dependencies and stuff like that. So that's something that it also keeps a log of the versions that have come and installed in your node modules, and that's something and also the repositories of those, right? So if you look at another thing, which is basically the HTTP client module, right? So in the newer build system, it says that it has made changes in terms of like what client HTTP. Now from HTTP client module, it has moved to provide HTTP client, which is a provided function, and then with the interceptor from DI. So these are the two other functions that it has imported instead of HTTP client module. And I'll just look at down below that what exactly is changed here. So you can see that the HTTP client module has gone. Now router module for child, it is correct, and it has now added another one, which is a provide HTTP client with interceptor from DI, right? So now again, this is a function, and as you can see from the documentation also, that's something that if you hover over this particular function, it tells you that include class-based interceptor configuration using multi-provider in the current injector into the configured HTTP client instance. Prefer with interceptors and functional interceptor instead, as support for DI provided interceptors may be phased out in the later releases, right? So that's another one that has changed, and that's something that we have also implemented, right? So these are the 3 files which got changed. So let me just commit these 3 files as well. So I'll write down the commit message as, and let me sync this. Okay, done. Right. So let me close this as well. Right. Okay. So now again, let me take you back to the browser. And there in the browser, I'm going to be opening the documentation that I was referring to later. So that's something, the step number 2 has already been done. Now I'm going to be changing the, I haven't really I'm sorry, I did not use Angular material. It was a bootstrap based application. So, that step is not required. Now I'm going to be running the 3rd step, which is the final step, which is update TypeScript to version 5.4 or newer, right? Now let's go back to the, all right, so we don't have the material, so that's something which is not really required to be changed. And again, let me go back to browser and show you the last step, which is update TypeScript version to 5.4 or newer. So now let me take you back to the code editor, and let's see what version of TypeScript are we using. All right, so yeah, we are already using 5.4.5, so that's something which is already recommended, and then I don't think so we need to make any changes in here. Right, so we are pretty much done. And again, let me take you back to the browser, and in the browser, I'll just check this particular thing, and we are good to go. Right, so now we have migrated our application from Angular 17 to Angular 18. Now it's a time for us to run the interesting stuff, which is talking about Zone.js and stuff like that, right? So now I'll open my documentation once again, and I'll open the list of things that I'm going to be checking first. So I'll close down all the other remaining tabs, and I'll just do this. I'll have to restart this application, but let me refresh the page. Now you can see that the application is not essentially running, and I'm basically running Macoon, right? So let me again show you this. So here is the list of APIs that are required for this particular application to run. So first is API students, API addresses, API student marks, API students details, and that's something that I have already written over here. And all of these things can be found in my repository, and that's something I'll also commit lately. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to take you back to the browser, and there in the browser, here if you look at this, so it says simpler debugging. Let's now, as I had also previously spoken about these 5 points, so one of the most interesting point about these 5 is called simpler debugging, right? So why it is so that it tells us that this application is simpler to debug when we are using a Zone.js, right? So as of now, right, so this is what we're going to be talking about now. So what I would do is, like, I'll just highlight this particular stuff because this is what we're going to be checking now. Now again, let's just go back to the Zoneless, the Angular documentation, and see what it has to offer. So All right, so now we're going to be seeing what it means for us to make an application zoneless, right? So the first step is done, which is basically migrating our application from Angular 17 to Angular 18. Now we are going to be making our application zoneless. So how do we make zoneless? Why is zoneless? So these are the points that basically Angular has listed, which is on improved performance and improved core web vitals, improved debugging experience, and better ecosystem compatibility, right? So improved debugging experience is what we are going to be experiencing now in the first step, and we'll also cover these steps a little while later. But then let's just make the application zoneless, right? So now if you notice here, it says that it's experimental features, right? So it's not really something which is live yet, but it is experimental. So in order to make in order to make the application zoneless, so here, if you come down to this particular part of the application, with this particular part of the documentation where it says that enabling zoneless in an application, the API for enabling zoneless is currently experimental. Neither the shape nor the underlying behavior is stable and can change the patch versions. There are known feature gaps, including the lack of ergonomic API, which prevents the application from serializing too early for the server side rendering. Now, there is this. Now, if you also look at this particular section, it says requirements for zoneless compatibility. Angular relies on notification from core API in order to determine when to run change detection and on which views. These notifications include change detection.mark for check, component ref.set input, updating a signal that's read in the template, bound host or template listener callbacks, attaching a view, and so on and so forth, right? So this is something that, it talks about the compatibility of a zoneless. But then what we are going to do now is that basically going to be making our application zoneless. So how do we make our application zoneless? It's fairly simple. We have the standalone application and we have made use of this particular thing, which is Bootstrap application, my app providers, and things like that. So what we're going to do is, like, we're going to be seeing if the application that we had built earlier is standalone application or ng module based. If it is a standalone application, then this is the piece of code that we'll have to insert in the main.ts, and if it is a module based application, this is the piece of information that we will have to put in, right? So let's just dive right into the code editor and close this package JSON, and we're going to be opening the main.ts, and there you go. Now we realize that the application that we have made use of is basically a standalone application, so Bootstrap application and so on and so forth, right? So let's get inside the app config. Now in the app config, the thing that we need to make in order to make this zoneless is basically provide a particular function which is called provide experimental zoneless change detection, right? So let me just put this right here and do this. Okay, so let's just save this bit here. Provide experimental zone detection. So let's just fix this. All right, so now if you look at it, you may realize that from the Angular code, provide experimental zoneless change detection is being implemented, right? Now let me save this, and now comes the important part. Now what I'm going to do is basically starting this application. So let me clear this console once again, and I'll see that if that really works or if it shows any error. That's something we're going to be experiencing now, right? So how do we do that? It's simple. We come here and then just run let's just open the package JSON and see what exactly is the command that we had used earlier. So that's called npm run start, right? So let me write down this. Well, so application has compiled successfully, and let's just go back to browser and see if that really works, right? So we're already seen that we are running the Macoon in order to render the API. There are 4 APIs that we had built in order to build this particular application. So now let me just refresh and it'll take us to the login page. Let's come here. Okay, so the point that we're going to be validating is simpler debugging. And let's just say that if the debugging has become really simpler when we are using a Zone.js zoneless application. So let's just come here, the sources, or rather let me come at performance. And what I'm going to do is, like, I'm just going to be reporting this and see if things work or not, right? So let's just do this and do a login. It takes about 2 seconds to log in, and looks like something is not right. It looks like the application that we had built is not really working. Okay, so now you can see that the application hasn't really rendered, right? And if you look at the console, is also clean. And now the interesting part. Now look at the network tab. Now in the network tab, I've already listed not all, but basically the fetch and XHR calls, which is basically the API that we're using, the students, the API /students API. So now if you look at this, it returns the data, but what is the reason that why it is not really listing over here, right? So in order to understand that, I'll have to again take you back to the Zone.js compatibility, Zone.js documentation, Zoneless. I'll have to take you back to the Angular documentation and also see this particular thing, right? So requirements for zoneless compatibility. So it states like what are the things that it would do, and then read this section carefully. So it says one way to ensure that the component is using correct notification mechanism from above is to use chain reduction strategy on push. The on push chain reduction strategy is not required, but it is a recommended step toward zoneless compatibility for application component. It is not always possible for library component to use chain reduction on push. When a library component is a host or user component, which might use, it cannot use on push because that would prevent the child component from being refreshed. If it is not on push compatible, that relies on Zone.js to trigger chain reduction, component can use default strategy as long as they notify Angular when chain reduction needs to run, calling mark for check using signals, async, pipe, etc. Right? So what it is actually tells us that you either need to use on push, or if you're not using on push, then you will have to make use of mark for check or things like that, right? So you can basically use it, or otherwise you can make use of signals to push those, and then also using async pipe and set timeout and etc. Right? Now let's just go back to the code editor, and I'll show you the component that we intend to change, and which basically is responsible for rendering that particular page where it lists all the students. So let's just open that particular component, so which is here the dashboard. Yeah, so there it is. So let's just open the TS file and also minimize this particular section over here, right? And then it says that here's the thing. It tells us that this dot students is the one which is basically getting the students assigned. And if I open this in the equal half and try to look at the students variable, you would notice that it is the one which is basically being used. So here, 1, 2, 3, here's the thing, right? So it says that for student track this, right? So now let's just see how do we change this so that the newer Zone.js less compatible, it is Zone.js less compatible, and also it is basically marked, right? So let's just import one thing. Let's just do this, save this, and let me again take you back to the browser. And here at the browser, let me just input the username and password, and let's see if this works. So log in, and there you go. Now you can see that the application has really worked, right? So now again, we will go back to the question that we were talking about earlier, which is simpler debugging. Now let's say that if the debugging has really become simpler. So let me go to the performance tab. All right, so there is another important aspect, ladies and gentlemen. So in case if you want to understand about these performance tab and all the other tabs listed here, please do write down in the comment section below. It is very, very interesting. And it is something that I have personally learned in the very beginning of my career. And ever since I've learned it, I've always felt great about being a UI developer. Trust me, and it gives you so much of insight that you can basically fine tune your application as much as you like, right? So if you're using this, if you do not know how to use it, please do write in the comment section below, and I'll list down a few articles for you wherein you can actually go back and understand this bit. But just to give you a summary of how the debugging of this application particularly works. So I'll just list down this, right? So let me just refresh this page and also key in the username and password. And hang on. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be basically recording this particular session, and then I've already keyed in the username and password, and I'll click login. And once I log in and render it here, that's when we will see that, you know, how much it took and, you know, what really was a zoneless JS application really easy to debug, right? So let me stop this. Now there you go. Now, if you look at this particular bit here, right? So I want to bring your attention to the main. And if you look at this main, what it really does is that whatever action that you are performing in your browser, it basically lists down all the things that's happening in the background, right? So you know that there are a lot of there are a number of functions which gets triggered in order to render the particular page, and those all functions are essentially listed here, right? So you may notice that this was the longest of all, right? So if you look at this, you may notice that this was the longest time, as you can see over here, right? Wherein I clicked on the login, and immediately after that, it renders a page here, right? So between this time. So what really happened is that you may also notice that there is no function from the zone.js. Otherwise, what used to happen earlier, whenever we are building an application which is a zone.js based application, the change direction is dependent on zone.js, it first of all lists down most of the calls from the zone.js, and then eventually your strict trace appears, right? But now if you look at this particular thing, it tells you that exactly, you know, without any interference from the zone.js, what's really happening in the background, right? So now you can see how many function calls are there, and then this is a GC event. GC basically the garbage collector. So in my opinion, I would see that yes, certainly this particular thing have really become easier. I can see that all of these are Angular based functions. They are nothing from the zone.js, right? Now to give you the perspective, now what I would do is like I'll start another application which is a zone.js based application, and then we will see that if the stack trace is really that easy to debug or not, right? So all right, so what I've done is that I've started another application. Essentially it's absolutely the same application, but one is running on port number 4200. The other application, which is on the older Angular version and also runs on Zone.js based change reduction system, so that's running on Angular 1700, right? So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be basically inspecting, you know, how it really functions and behaves. So what I'm going to do is like I think I'll go to the performance tab and I'll start recording this session, right? So let me write down the username and password, and after putting in the username and password, I'm going to be clicking on login, and I'll record what is really happening in the background, right? So this is done. Now I'm going to go to students, subjects, and then come here again, and I'm going to be stopping this bit now. Now let's see how the state trace has come up. Oh, wow. Now here is the one which is right after the login, and let's just see how it behaves. Now you can see the problem. So if you notice closely over here, there are so many functions which gets called from the zone.js based application. So now look at this stack trace. So this is entirely zone.js based. So zone.js invoke, zone.js run task, invoke task, and things like that. Similarly, if you come further here towards the left, you would see that zone.js, all of these is the one which is on the blue color are basically coming from the zone.js library. So now let's just come down here. All of these are zones again. Now the yellow ones are not from the zone, obviously, and all these blue ones are from the zone, right? And invoke again, zone.js is invoking this application, right? And let's see if I go towards the right. There also, you see that all this zone task, invoke task, run task, all of these are basically from the zone.js function. If you go further down at this level, you would notice that yep. So this layout, most of these are, some of these are basically from non-zone.js based applications. So now if you look at this particular trace, right, for this particular event, when we have clicked on the username and password and click enter, and right after the enter, you notice that all of this, right? So most of these blue color ones, all these functions which are getting triggered are basically from the zone.js. So if you were to debug an application and you wanted to know like how predictably one can call the function and how you can debug it. It is really difficult at this stage, right? So why it is difficult? Because you can see that there is a lot of interference from the zone.js and all. And there's something that you cannot really debug. You can debug though. It is not really going to be very helpful for you to debug, right? So if you go further down, again you see compiled code. So this is something which is not a zone.js based things. And again, anonymous function. Again, this is a zone.js thing. And then if you further go down, this is fine. This is basically happening from the context of Angular based code. So if you go further down, again, there are a lot of things which are happening from the zone.js. And then if you look at the state trace here, right, it looks super complex. Now see this, right? And at the same time, if I were to display this particular thing, right, for let's say for this span of a few seconds between this and this, right, where exactly we have clicked on the login button, and now you can see here, um, right, that we this is the login pigeon button, and then once you clicked on the login, this is the page where it landed and how it really functions, right? So all of this happened in the background, right? So now let's just compare this with the Angular 18 zoneless application. So here's the Angular zoneless application, and now look at this. Look at this stack trace. It's super simple. So I'm really happy to see this, honestly. Zone.js, like the stack trace has become a lot simpler, right? And also this is an experimental feature at this moment, right? It's not really something which is live yet, but it is basically running, on the experiment mode. Although I can see, yeah, run micro task, all of these functions. Amazing. That's pretty cool. So now you can see all these functions which are getting, called, let's say this one, get component ID. It took about 0.2 milliseconds to compute in this particular scenario. And then you further go down here also, you would notice that the trace is much simpler, right? It's not as complex as it was in the other cases, right? So this is good. So at least one point I can verify, which is the readable stack trace and simpler debugging. Since all right, so now we're going to be seeing what happens with faster load and low bundle size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking you back to the VS Code, and we'll try to build the application basically for Angular 18, and then we'll go to and do the building for Angular 17 application, and we'll see that what is the bundle size that comes out to be. The application is absolutely identical. There is no change whatsoever, right? And then we'll see how it functions. So let's just close everything down here, and I'll take you to the code editor where my Angular 18 application is running. So there is the Angular 18 application. Let me just shut this down and clear the console. Let me also kill the port. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is basically going to analyze the bundle, and I'm also going to be making the production bundle for this application, right? So how do we make a production bundle? It's fairly simple. You will have to put a configuration production here, and once you do this, it'll and you run the npm run build, it'll basically create a bundle production grade bundle inside the dist folder, right? So there is another thing that I want to bring your attention to. So for that, I'll take you to the browser, and here if I open, okay, so if you know that that we used to have something called Webpack Bundle Analyzer, right? Similarly, we have Vite, right? So here is the bundle visualizer or analyzer for Vite, because if you know that Angular 18 onwards, Angular has started using Vite for bundling and generating the dist folder. So it's not really a Webpack anymore. So in order to see how your bundle is getting generated and each file and its sizes, you will basically will have to make use of Vite-Bundle-visualizer. So how do we do it? We'll have to first of all install this, and for which I'll take you to the code editor. And here in this case, I'm just going to be running this command. And post this run, it will install the Vite-Bundle-visualizer. So let me run it. I'm going to be doing it this. Let me run this command. because since we have migrated from the older version to the newer one, there are some dependency problems. So for that, we can pass on that flag as you may have noticed here, which is legacy PDAPs. And once you do that, it will basically install all these applications. It will install all these packages healthily, right? So once this bit is done, what I'm going to do is like I'm now going to do the build. So the build command, I'm going to be running it with npm run build. And once this run, it'll basically do the production configuration and post all these things inside the dist folder. So once this is done, the next command I'm going to do is I'm going to be basically making use of Vite-Bundle-visualizer, and I'll have to make this visualizer run from the folder from the dist folder, right? So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be putting inside there. Okay, so I think I'm already there in that particular folder. So let me run this npx vite visualizer. It'll take a moment, and once it's done, it'll open up an HTML page. So now I'm going to be taking you to that HTML page that it has just opened. Now you can see that it has opened the HTML page, and once it opens up, it'll tell you which file is generated and how many files are generated and how much is the size for each one of those, right? So inside the Vite, this is related to the Vite configuration, and just look at the main.js. So here in the main.js, you can see that it is coming out to be 4.12 KB, right? So this is basically when you have the zone.js less application. So we have basically imported we have imported and then we have configured our app config.ts such that it provides the experimental zone.js chain reduction, right? So that's what we wanted to visualize. Now you can notice that all of these files are generated like this, right? So now what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be generating the same file for Angular 17. So I have done the same exercise or same steps in Angular 17 folder as well. So now I'm going to be running the Vite-Bundle-visualizer command from the Angular 17. And once I run it, it's going to be opening another file over here. Just wait for a moment. It's now you can see that it has run the file. Now the one in the last browser tab, I have the Vite visualizer for Angular 17 application, and one on the left is a Vite visualizer for Angular 18 application, which is a Zone.js less application, right? So now if you notice that the main TS file, the main.js file still has extra bytes, right? So now you can see that it is rendered 4.12 KB, and in the Angular 17, you can notice that it is merely 4.01 KB, right? So the claim for Angular that the low bundle size hasn't really it doesn't really come out to be true, right? It is also because at this moment it is an experimental feature. So I'm assuming that they will probably have to ship all the files related to Zone.js library and also the non-Zone.js library based chain reduction. Probably that's the reason why the bundle size is a little bit higher. But then once this becomes a live feature and properly available without having to do any setting, and probably this bundle size would be lower. But unfortunately, at this moment, when you run it in the experimental, when you run it in the manner it is recommended right now, so as you can see, the bundle size is coming out to be a little higher than Angular 17. So what I'm going to do is like I'll take you back to Angular 18 code editor, and what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be generating the same feature using the Zone.js change detection. So in order to do this, I'll have to revert all the changes that I've done, right? So let me close down all of this. And here, if you notice that this is the thing that I had done. So I'll also remove this bit. And I'm also going to be removing this bit, right? So after this, I am going to be going to the app config TS. And here, let me remove this change here, right? And once this is done, now I'm going to be creating another npm run build, and I'll see that what is the bundle size at this moment, right? So I just run this. It'll take a moment, and after that, yep, it's done. And let's see the present working directory is we're at the right place. And let me just run the visualizer. Right now, I'll take you to the browser once again, And here the browser, now you see that it has generated the new, it has generated the folder basis the zone.js changes. So now you can see that the main TS file is roughly about 4.12 KB. And let's just go to the older one. So here it was again 4.12 KB, but the polyfill was 33.94 KB. Let's see how much is this. Yeah, it's coming out to be absolutely same. 301.39. 301 dot, yep, there is the change. If you look at the chunk.js, here the earlier size was 301.54 KB. And if you look at now, it is coming out to be 301.39 KB, right? So obviously, there are some bit of code that comes along with the zone.js less change reduction, and that makes an application at this moment a little heavier. So what we have come to realize is that these two things are yet to be done. These are not, or rather, let me just mark them reverse. What I would do is I like put them like this, and these two things are still something under consideration because it's again something that is under development. So it's not really live properly per se. It is again an experimental feature running the application outside the zone.js context. So this is something that we will come back to a little while later whenever this zoneless JS application is properly out. For now, it turned out to be false, that it is not really generating a bundle which is lower than the size of a non of the zone.js less application, right? So, all right. So now we are going to be talking about the fifth point, which is improving composability for micro frontend and interoperability with other framework. So that's something I believe that we can't really check at this moment, because for that we will probably have to build the micro frontend first and then see that how it really functions with React or other framework. There's something I'm going to be striking them out, or I'm not really going to be touching upon this feature as of now. So what I would do is like I'll mark them blue, but then we will come to this a little while later, right? So let me just, we have now covered the entire zoneless change reduction feature, and let me just list down our finding, right? So the first finding of ours is which came out is like track trace is readable indeed, right? And second thing is the D better. Third thing is the bundle size at this moment is not comparison. And fourth point is obviously, since it is not really doing a smaller bundle, so obviously at no cost it can basically do a faster load. So we couldn't really figure out, we couldn't really see these 2 points come out as true. However, we have figured out that the other two things are really true. And then we'll come back to this later whenever this application is properly live. So this is our take at this moment. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be finishing up the first part of this series, which is basically covering all the aspect of new Angular 18 release. And with the experimental flag, we didn't find these two to be true, but other things came out to be a little true. And this E point is something which we will cover probably in future, because I'll first of all have to create a micro frontend with React or Ember or Vue.js based framework, and then we'll see that how it works. But as of now, it appears to be only these 2 points appears to be true, right? So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening in. I'll see you in the next tutorial, wherein we would see that how deferrable views work in Angular 18 and what impact do they have in Angular build, production build, bundle size, right? And as they say in their in their release note that if you do it this way, if you create a deferrable view, it is a little faster and the lower bundle size. With that, we'll see a little while. It makes the things a little faster, and that's something we will objectively view and visualize, objectively view and check, from the Chrome Dev tool. So thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next one, wherein we would cover the dev capabilities.